Hello and welcome to another episode, and today we're doing something a little bit different. One of the things I enjoyed doing on the channel in 2017 were top 5 videos. I had a lot of fun doing these. I want to continue that trend, but I want to expand that category into other mediums and other things. And there's something that I love personally that I don't get to talk about a lot on this channel, and as you can tell by the t-shirt I'm wearing, it's Batman. I have a love and admiration for Batman like no one else. And it's a character that I've loved since I was about 3 years old. Anyways, today I want to take the time and pick my personal top 5 favorite Batman stories ever told. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, every single one of the stories I'm picking is from the comics. Instead, I sat down, I thought about this list, I created this list, I thought about doing the movies and stuff, and I realized that a lot of the movies are just interpretations of what we've seen in the comics. So specifically, this is a top 5 favorite Batman stories from the comics. Number 5 on my list is going to be a very, very seminal piece of Batman lore and a very, very seminal Batman story, and that is The Long Halloween, written by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. This was a fantastic story that came out in the 80s that I read later on as I was starting to get back into Batman. You know, I did have a period of time where I was a kid and then kind of grew out of it a little bit. You know, when you hit your early teens and all that, you know, teen angst and all that shit. And then when Batman Begins hit, that's what really sucked me back into the character of Batman, because it was finally doing what I wanted to do with the character of Batman on screen. And because of that, a lot of elements of a lot of these stories were put into those movies, as in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. You know, some of my favorite Batman stories of all time, different pieces of it were kind of brought into that. And The Long Halloween is an excellent example of that. It's a very, very fantastic Batman story that takes place over an entire calendar year, and different holidays have different things that happen. It's also one of the first times you really get a chance to explore the character of Carmine Falcone and his mob family. And that's always been a character that's really fascinated me because it's different than all the other Batman villains. You know, I will still always argue that, and Batman has the best rogue gallery of villains of any character in any comics. Like, you know, it beats out anything Marvel has, it beats out any other DC superhero. It's just, people have written such excellent Batman villains, and The Long Halloween does a great job of accentuating all Batman villains at that time. So, really excellent story. It's a really good read. Maybe at some point I'll show you guys at the end of this video my shelf that kind of has all of my Batman graphic novels and stuff, and that doesn't even count the comics I have. Like, good lord. That's going to be number 5 on my list. One thing that I fell off of from being a kid back up into my mid-20s was reading Batman comics. I got into a groove with reading different graphic novels, but at the time I kind of didn't know how to get back into the comics. You know, there was a time where we were on like Batman number like 600, 700, 800, Detective Comics, whatever number they were on, and there just didn't seem like a good way to jump back in. And so it was always a very daunting thing for me at the end of, I would say, 2010, you know, or so. After The Dark Knight came out in 2008, I really wanted to get back into Batman comics. You know, we had a long 4-year wait between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, and I needed to get my Batman fix. I started with graphic novels and stuff. Some I had read as a kid, some I hadn't read, and for me, DC started the New 52, where they relaunched every single one of their books in September of 2011. And this was perfect for me. I wanted to jump back in and see everything. And I just happened to walk into a local comic shop at the time, and as that event was going on, I didn't even know what was going on. I hadn't followed comics in years. I had read graphic novels, but I hadn't followed comics at all. And I walked in, and it was like the perfect marriage of walking in, seeing that everything was rebooting to issue number 1, and I jumped right in with Batman. and I jumped right in with a very little known author who is now a Batman writer rock star today, Scott Snyder, someone who I've met personally several times and at different conventions and stuff. He's an awesome, awesome man. One of the best Batman writers to ever pick up a pen and write some of these Batman stories. And it's hard for me to look at his phenomenal run from issue 1 through 52 of the New 52 before they relaunched into the Rebirth stuff that's going on in the comics right now. But for me, if I had to sit down and pick any one of his excellent Batman stories, it is his first initial run, issues 1 through 12, about the Court of Owls. Because not only did this man create something new that we hadn't seen in Batman ever, he also created a insane villain that Batman really, really rubbed knuckles with Batman for a good 6 issues until you realize that he was just one of many in the Court of Owls. What a fantastic storyline. And it was something that I look forward to every month, getting the next issue and waiting and waiting. And this not only was so good, it's what got me back into comics and collecting comics and reading comics again. And even though right now I only pretty much read Batman comics, Scott Snyder's run 1 through 12, if I had to pick anything at all from his run on Batman, it's issues 1 through 12. It's just fantastic. It's such an incredible Batman story, and it really adds something new to a character that is, over 80 years old, that you didn't think that it was even possible. For me personally, number 4 is going to be Scott Snyder's Court of Owls run on Batman. Number 3 on my list is several different Batman stories, but I'm combining it into one epic run, and it's from one of the best Batman writers of all time, one of the best comic book writers of all time, and that is Grant Morrison. This is specifically Grant Morrison's run that started with issue Batman number 655 all the way through the end of his run with him going back in time and all that kind of stuff. It is a crazy, ridiculous run of Batman that I personally can't do justice. It's something I hope you guys go and seek out if you have any interest in the character of Batman. It not only takes elements of Batman that were forgotten throughout the years and kind of brings them back, it also adds things to the table that you weren't expecting. And for me personally, sitting down, reading that whole run, it was crazy. Things happen in that run that you would never expect with Batman. Batman has a kid. Him and Talia al Ghul have a kid, and he's raised up and becomes the new Robin, which is Damian Wayne. And I know Damian Wayne today is a pretty common thing in Batman comics, but at the time that was a really new and original idea that was taken from an offshoot graphic novel that wasn't considered canon until Grant Morrison made it canon. There's other crazy stuff in here. New villains rise up. Batman travels through time, which seems like a ridiculous prospect, but it's actually really, really interesting. I think the villain of Dr. Hurt is one of the most interesting villains in any Batman story. And it's just such a crazy, off-the-wall Batman epic storyline. One of my other favorite aspects of it is during this time, when Batman is trapped in time, someone else has to be Batman. And we're going to get to this idea more when we get to my number 1 Batman story of all time. But one thing I've always really enjoyed in Batman is when somebody else has taken up the mantle of Batman. And for me personally, Dick Grayson Batman is one of my favorites. And it's just because he's still Dick Grayson, he's still Robin, but he's Robin under the Bat costume, and it just makes for a fun time. Sometimes he's a more interesting Batman. One of my favorite scenes of any comic of him as Batman, and I don't think it's in the Grant Morrison run, I can't remember because this stuff bleeds together. I want to say when I describe it, it sounds like something Scott Snyder wrote, and I think it's from the Black Mirror, but you guys will have to correct me if I'm wrong. But there's a scene, the first scene of him and Commissioner Gordon on the rooftop when they're meeting. And Commissioner Gordon is not a dumb man. Like, he pretty much knows who Batman is. He and Batman kind of have this, I don't tell, you don't tell kind of a mentality going on. And he knows that Bruce Wayne is not Batman right now. Somebody else is. He can pretty much put together that it's Dick Grayson. And they have this awesome scene together in this exchange on the rooftop. But the thing that I thought was awesome about it is when it's all done, he's still standing there, other than, you know, normally Batman just disappears, and they kind of have this exchange of like, normally you'd be gone right now, I wouldn't even see you leave, and Dick Grayson Batman just kind of says back to him, I'm doing things differently. I thought it was a fantastic thing, so I really like Dick Grayson Batman. But Grant Morrison's excellent run, just from beginning to end, it's such a crazy work that I've read through it about 3 times now, and I still find something new to appreciate about it every single time. So that's number 3 on my list. Of course, what Batman story wouldn't be complete without Frank Miller's seminal 80s work, The Dark Knight Returns? Now, yes, they have made this into a phenomenal animated movie, but I think you're kidding yourself if you don't sit down and actually read the graphic novel that that animated movie is based on. Now, what's really cool about this story is it has such a take on everything that was going on in the world in the 1980s, but it also is one of those seminal Batman stories where you get one of the biggest things that comic book nerds like myself is always question is, would win the fight, Batman or Superman? You know, that was a big thing in the 2016 Batman v Superman movie. Having one of my favorite things in any Batman story is his fight with Superman in that book, and they kind of did it some justice in Batman v Superman. Seeing him in that armor was enough to make me, you know, pay big money to go see that movie and own a 4K Blu-ray of that movie. But this book is a phenomenal piece of Batman storytelling, and even though Frank Miller has written 2 sequels to this that have been kind of less than stellar, the original is always going to be the best. It's very interesting. It has some really interesting takes on social and political commentary from the 80s, at the time period that this was set in. And also, it's just a fantastic Batman story. I mean, this is a Batman who hasn't been Batman for 20 years and is coming back and being Batman for the first time in 20 years. And he's more ruthless than he was, and it's really fantastic. It's just, I can't say enough good things about it. If you're a Batman story and you want to kind of see what I would consider the last Batman story, Frank Miller wrote it, and it's fantastic. That's number 2 on my list. And finally, number 1 on my list, my favorite Batman story of all time. The one that really clicked for me as a kid, and still to this day. I don't think, even though elements of it have been in the movies, and we'll get to that here, I don't think anyone will ever do it justice in either one of the DC animated movies, or if they do a live action version of this story. I just don't think it can be done justice. It's too big, there's too much going on, and that is Nightfall. Nightfall is my favorite Batman story of all time, and the reason for that is Jean Paul Valley Batman. The idea that someone else can take up the mantle of Batman, but also be bad, do bad things as Batman. The question for me as a kid, as I was reading this story, was how far is this guy going to take it until he lets someone die or kills someone or does that? I mean, this was an idea that was incredibly new for Batman at the time. You know, as a kid, I'd never seen someone else take up the mantle of Batman, so that was an interesting prospect. You also didn't see Batman defeated in such a way in which he could not be Batman anymore at the time, you know. And not only did this run of Batman introduce the character of Jean Paul Valley Batman, it also introduced one of my favorite Batman villains of all time, and that is Bane. And Bane is such an incredible Batman villain. He's so different than everything else, but he's one of the only Batman villains that has truly ever beaten Batman, and that's what makes him an interesting and fascinating character. You know, seeing Batman broken by this man is a scene unlike anything else in Batman. And you know, one thing I'll point out here is, you know, some people like The Dark Knight Rises, some people hate The Dark Knight Rises. I fall in the category of people that like The Dark Knight Rises. However, for me personally, if I was writing that Batman story, I would have ended it differently than Christopher Nolan did. However, because it kind of went with the themes of that trilogy, I get why he did what he did. However, the one thing I will always praise about that movie that it got for me was seeing on screen for the first time Batman getting his back broken by Bane. I mean, when that scene happened in that movie, my jaw hit the ground, because it brought me back to, you know, being a kid in the 90s, sitting with the covers over my head with a flashlight, reading that comic for the first time. And I never thought I would see that in a movie adaptation Batman movie ever. live action, not animated. And to see that for the first time was incredible. But for me personally, I love that storyline. I love the darker take that Jean-Paul Valley has on Batman. You know, he's this very different Batman. He's a very troubled man with all of his brainwashing and everything else from the Order of Saint Dumas. And he, you know, he neglects Robin. He kind of doesn't even want Robin to be Robin. He wants to do his own thing. He crafts his own Batman suit. This insane badass Batman suit he crafts, which is ridiculous, and it looks awesome. And then when he becomes kind of the bad Batman, and Bruce Wayne comes back after his back is repaired, and they clash with each other towards the climax of the story, you know, he has the red suit. It's fantastic. Like, what an awesome Batman tale to see a good Batman versus a bad Batman. And that was something that was new and original and different at the time. And for me personally, I don't think any Batman story is ever going to top that. You know, I've been waiting. I've come close. There's been other stories that, you know, Scott Snyder, again, I think is a rock star of the comics world. And he's such a fantastic writer that did some really excellent things with Batman while he was working on it. You know, even right now he's writing All-Star Batman and doing some other things. But his work with him and artist Greg Capullo on all of that Batman stuff was fantastic. So anyways, guys, that's my top 5 favorite Batman stories from the comics of all time. I'd be curious to know what yours are. This was a fun video for me to do because it takes a break from talking about games and movies and stuff and talks about one of my other passions that I don't get to talk about very often, and that is Batman in the comics. So, and just the character of Batman as a whole. Anyways, guys, as always, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.